So good evening to everybody. I hope everyone had a wonderful morning session at our InCTF conference. This evening, we have the wonderful pleasure of two excellent speakers. The evening for us, actually, I should say morning if you're somewhere else in the world. It might be morning for you or afternoon. Our first speaker is Mr. Dotan Sagi, who is the founder and CEO of B Strategic Solutions. He will deliver his talk, which is Lessons Learned from Managing Crisis in VUCA. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Well, it's an acronym for Volatility, Uncertainty, Complexity, and Ambiguity World. Mr. Sagai is the founder and CEO of B Strategic Solutions, a disruptive technology that has already begun to revolutionize the crisis management world by digitally transforming the world of war gaming and tabletop exercises. And if you're not familiar with what those terms are, don't worry. I'm sure Mr. Sagai will explain them. Beginning as head of security training, he has a start as head of security training for El Al, Israel's premier airline in 2003. Dotan now has more than 20 years of experience designing crisis management simulations for the government and private sector, having led crisis management simulations for airlines, banks, universities, and governments. So we are extremely excited and happy to have Mr. Dotan Sagi. I don't know if I'm saying your last name right or wrong, Dotan, I'm sorry. It is a pleasure to have you with us here at the conference, and please feel free to take the stage now and begin your presentation.
So thank you very much, Gilad. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, loud and clear.
Excellent, excellent. And my screen is being shared, right?
Yes, we see the slide, Be Strategic.
Fantastic, so I can start. So thank you very much for having me. I'm only 3.5 hours away from you. It's not morning here, it's the afternoon. And again, thank you very much. A little about myself and the presentation that I'm going to be talking about. I won't keep it in acronyms and I won't, keep it at 30,000 feet. I'm a guy that does things on the ground, and I'll explain how we do it and what this means. I come from a crisis management background, as you said. I used to be head of training for El Al, Israeli Airlines. That's where I first encountered this issue of crisis. Now, in the next few days, or the few days I've seen a few of these lectures, everyone was talking cyber and around those areas. I'm not a cyber guy. I'm probably the only one in these few days that doesn't come from a cyber background. And yet, in the last 3 years, I've carried out more than 160 simulations with organizations on cyber crisis. And the reason is that a crisis is a crisis is a crisis. And I'm going to be talking about that. So when you know and you understand the characteristics of a crisis and what it means to manage such an event, then it doesn't matter if it's the origin is cyber or terrorism. The characteristics, as I said, are the same. I myself have worked as part of preparing and training an organization for crisis, both security and safety-wise. I know what it is when you write procedures and protocols, and then you train the organization on how to prepare for this crisis. And I've sat in the command and control room through a few terror attacks, 2 to be exact. And I know what it is that after you've trained and worked and prepared, the reality always leads you in different directions. And it doesn't matter what you've written. What matters is the people and how they're going to manage this event. And that is something that I'm going to be talking about now. Now, the fact that I'm having to do this from Israel now and not from India is due to the fact that we've been in a crisis for the past 3 years. We should ask ourselves, is this still a crisis? Have we not learned how to be prepared for this type of event? And even in 2020, the head of the WHO said, the world may be dangerously unprepared for the next pandemic. The reality is we're still not prepared for the one that's raging outside. So a crisis always has different aspects than the ones that we are focused on. A pandemic crisis is not just a pandemic crisis. It is a social crisis. It is an economic and financial crisis. It has many, many faces. And that's what we're going to be talking in the next few hours. But in order for us to do that, we first have to define what is a crisis. A crisis is defined by Schultz in 2011, and there are many different definitions. This is the one that I like most, is a specific, something that is specific and that is unexpected and non-routine. If you've been having a pandemic for the last 3 years, you cannot still define this as a crisis. You should have known how to prepare, change, react, and work with this. We define a crisis as something that is specific, unexpected, and non-routine. Something that will create high levels of uncertainty within the organization and will threaten, either real or perceived to threaten, the organization's high priority goals. So when we talk about crisis, the first question we should be asking ourselves, what are the goals of this entity that we're going to have to manage its crisis? If I am an insurance company, then what are my high priority goals? If I'm a bank, what are my goals? And many times we're surprised because we have a tendency to throw out to save people. Our goals is to save money. But in many cases, there are other high-level goals. So when we sit down in an organization, we start to create our business continuity plan. As we start to plan, how will we be able to deal with different types of events? And when we talk in the cyber world, we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about hacking and ransomware and all different types of events that can escalate through the cyber domain. But do we really know what are the goals of the organization that we have to protect and deal with? And that is the first step in managing crisis. We must also understand that in crisis, it will never stop with the one event that we're dealing with. And I just gave the example of the pandemic. The pandemic has social, financial, right? Political in many cases, crisis. There are many different factors and phases that will develop from this one event. An insurance company that's being hacked. What is the crisis? Is it only the technical part of being attacked? Or is it the reputation, the ability to continue doing business and bringing in money? Is it protecting our clients? Is it bringing in new clients? Because we can stop the hacking event, right? Maybe we can close down our systems, but if we are not able to continue providing service to our clients, then we're gone. Or if our reputation has been damaged in such a way that we cannot get new clients in the future, then we're finished. This understanding has to take place. When we are talking about organizations, we have to understand that a crisis is never only one phase. There will be many different phases, and we have to understand pre the event. We understand how each and every event can affect us. Where will it affect us? And how will it allow the organization to continue doing the business that it's doing? The three main sectors that we see in managing a crisis, and this is not in the priority, each one can decide on their own priority, and the organizations and different organizations will prioritize these differently, can be from loss of reputation. What does it mean when I am managing a crisis or mismanaging a crisis or not reacting in time to a crisis? What does this loss of reputation mean to me? Loss of life? Is it a hurricane? Is it a terror attack? Is it any other security type of event that may lead to loss of life? Is it loss of funds, both actual now and future ones? Is it a run on banks that is created through a crisis or a perceived crisis through media manipulation and fake news? These are three of the main factors that we see when we manage a crisis and loss of life. And we need to take these into account when we start planning our business continuity plans and our crisis management plans. We know that the main effects of crisis will begin on the physical side, financial side, reputation, and may disclose internal weaknesses. The fact that we are now involved in a crisis, and in many cases, we are unable to stop the crisis from taking place. And yet, when it starts, it will be very difficult to mitigate those different threats. And therefore, we will always see effects that are financial, reputation, credibility, and in many times disclosing our internal weaknesses, allowing organizations and attackers to see where we are weak and therefore to continue attacking us. So when we start thinking about how we're going to manage our crisis and build our crisis plans, we should be thinking of protecting ourselves on the physical, financial, reputation, credibility, and how we are perceived by those on the other side, especially when we're talking in the cyber domain. When we look at crisis, we look at 3 crisis management phases. If we take this on an axis where the Y is activity, the level of intensity, and our X axis is time, the time it takes, we will see that in our crisis, the first stage will be what we call the emergency response. Something has happened. The crisis has started. We've been hacked. A terrorist has walked into our building and opened fire. The hurricane has hit us or is arriving to hit us. Usually it escalates very, very quickly and it peaks very quickly. And then it starts as time passes by, the emergency phase goes down. The question we should be asking ourselves is, how are we prepared for this phase? And were we able to stop the event as it started to escalate, or did we let it full itself out and we were not able to then deal with it? And yet, while we are already reacting to the emergency response and our activities go very high and we are at a very high level of intensity, at that same time, the organization should be saying, hey, not only should I be stopping this crisis from continuing to escalate, but I should be thinking of tomorrow, which is where the second stage jumps in, which is very, very close on the time zone to the emergency response. But we have more time to deal with it. And that is the continuity response. What is our organization? What are our priorities that we were talking about before? How do we allow the organization to continue its activities to fulfilling these goals? And this may happen while we're still dealing with the crisis and the emergency itself. We've been hacked. Other systems, our backup systems, we're closing down. But the crisis, as I said, is not only on the side of dealing with a cyber event. If you wait, and we see that with many organizations, if you wait till you've solved your emergency response and only then start talking about how we continue our business, then we will not have an opportunity to continue working. There are 2 fantastic examples. There was a terror attack in Brussels airport, where 3 terrorists walked into the check-in and 2 terrorists blew themselves up. And while Brussels airport dealt with this event, it took a long time to open and continue the business continuity. The same year, we had a terror attack in Istanbul. While the terror attack was taking place, already the organization was thinking how to continue and not disrupt its flights. The same evening, within a few hours, the airport was already open while they were still cleaning up the glass from the floors to continue landing and taking off. The fact that you can continue your business is a crucial part. And the only way you will be able to continue your business if you were able to plan it before. Because while you're in the middle of a crisis, it is very difficult to now think about all the aspects of business continuity. So organizations, when planning for crisis, should be prepared on what are the threats that will harm our priorities. How will we respond to each one of these threats in the emergency response? Who are the people that are the best equipped to deal with this emergency? And who are the other people, the other teams, the other plans that will allow the organization very quickly to be able to start working on their continuity, how they will be able to continue fulfilling their goals. Most organizations, or a lot of organizations, and I'll show you in a few seconds the statistics, 50% have the emergency response in place. If something happens, we will do A, B, future, reputation, how you're perceived, funds that we were talking about, and even human rights. But there is a third level, And the third level is the recovery response. And in the recovery response, we have all the processes that are there that allow the organization. I see that I was disconnected. Can you be heard? Can people hear me still?
Yeah, it cut out for a minute. I wasn't sure if it was me, but it came back now, so I think it's okay.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So we have the recovery response. That phase that allows the organization the ability to learn from different events, both in the organization and outside the organization, on how to manage its emergency response and its continuity, training, simulation, collecting information from other places. The only way that an organization is really prepared to manage is when they have the response for all of these three phases. And the truth is that very few organizations are. When we talk about wargaming and simulation, we talk about exactly that, the ability to practice and train both the emergency and the continuity, learn from it, and therefore be prepared for it. When we look at the reality in life, we see that 52% of companies do not have a plan on how to deal with crisis. And 57% never practice it. If you don't have a plan and you have never practiced crisis management or managing the events that may happen to you, then when it happens, it will be the first time you meet it and you will not be prepared. 63% of these organizations don't have systems in place that allow them to learn from other events. And then what happens is that these organizations are not prepared for crisis. The truth is that IBM says that organizations that do not have incident response plans and do not practice managing crisis will lose $2 million more in a cyber event than companies that do. So preparing has its financial consequences. This is what we see organizations that practice. They take their procedures and they simulate them and they collect information from real life and therefore are able to predict the behavior of their managers. If that is the truth, then the organization will know how it will respond to events. The only way you will be able to predict the behavior of people managing a crisis is through training and exercise and tabletops and wargaming. And tabletops and wargaming are when people sit on systems and they practice the event itself. Who will talk, what they'll say, how they will say, what decisions are made, and we'll discuss what the consequences of these decisions are. And in the end, they will be able to create their own procedures that are based on their behavior. When we look at more than 286 simulations that were carried out by us in the past 18 months, we have a few insights. One of the main insights is that 38% of managers did not work according to their own procedures because they did not identify the crisis they were in. If I walk into organizations and I say, hey, you have a procedure, do you think you'll act the same in a crisis? Most people would say yes. But when they practice these crises, we find out that 38% of the decision makers do not work according to their own processes because they didn't understand that they were in a crisis. And the truth is, and the reality is, that most training takes place when we tell someone, hey, you've been hacked. What do you do now? This has happened. What do you do? We do not teach people how the event will emerge, which is why they usually start dealing with the crisis at the peak of the emergency response. When you want to prepare for crisis, practice the red flags, those signs that will show you that the crisis is emerging. Be prepared for the hurricane before it hits the shore. Find the terrorist before they blow themselves up. Find your hacker as he's starting to penetrate the systems and before he has already closed down your system. The faster you are able to understand that you're in a crisis, the less the consequences will be. And you will be able to quickly resume your continuity response, and the intensity and the activity of the emergency will be lower. Remember, 38% of managers who practice crisis don't understand they're in the crisis when it begins. Do you know what the crisis is going to look like? Do you know what it means to be in a crisis? These are questions you should be asking yourself as you start to say, hey, I have to start being prepared for whatever is there out there for me. The second insight that we found is that 29% were not familiar with their incident response plan, their procedure. They had written a protocol, in many cases brought a very good consultant who had written a very good book that looked beautiful. In many cases, you get paid through the weight of the document. The more pages you write, the more money that you get. And we find out that nearly 30% of managers do not know their own plans. And then we found out something that's very, very interesting. If the security plan was up to 5 pages long, most of the people in the organization knew what they were supposed to do. That means that people have the attention span of understanding, remembering in a crisis up to 5 pages long. From page number 6, we saw a decline of 27% in the number of people, in the percentage of people that remembered what they had in their protocols. So when you start designing your protocols, you should be thinking, how long are my protocols? What's inside them? Another interesting thing that we saw, that if the protocols that you wrote are only written directions, then 70% of the people will remember. And if they have flowcharts, then you will increase the number of people that will remember the procedures by another 50%. So within the 80, another 50%. So you're nearly 100% of the people will remember the procedures when it's up to 5 pages long and includes both flowcharts and written documentation. When I see these long procedures for organizations and the procedures start with, this has happened, you're in the emergency, I know that there is a high level of possibility that the organization will not be able to work according to this protocol. When we look at insight number 3, we found out that 17% of people were managing a crisis during simulations and real events, by the way, did not work according to their procedure because they knew better or they thought they knew better. I know my procedure says do A, but I will do B because I know I have more experience. I've seen this, I've done it, I've heard about it. I have a gut feeling. Those were all the examples that people gave. 17%. What we found out is that out of those 17%, 96.4% were male above the age of 45. That means that males have a higher level of tendency to think they know better than written material. And that fits in with the joke that males will never ask for directions on their way, right? It's the same, we see it, it's the same thing. 17% out of those 17%, 96.4 thought they knew better than the procedures. Now, in some cases they did. In some cases, the procedures were not good and the experience the people had was better, which is why organizations should take from these exercises the reactions and the behavior of people, and if they did well, then go back to procedures and change them. We learned that procedures are not a thing that doesn't change. It has to get feedback from these simulations. It has to get feedback from real events and change. Writing a document and putting it in a cupboard will not protect you. It may look good. You may be compliant because your regulator will look at you and say, hey, you've got a procedure. But the truth is, when something happens, you have a very high level of people not being able to work according to this. When we started analyzing the behavior of people as they were managing crisis, we found out that 13% thought their coworkers were unreliable. That means that in the hierarchy of managing the crisis, if I have to involve someone else, I think they will not be able to perform and therefore will not go through them or not provide them with information that they need in order to deal with the crisis. That is where we see breakthroughs in communication, where information doesn't get from one place to another, making the organization unstable and not able to deal with the event. The normal hierarchy of the organization is not always the same hierarchy for managing the event. When a crisis happens, many streams of ways of information going through have to be faster. If you're a very hierarchical organization and information has to go from A to B and from B to C and from C to D and only then it gets to someone at the top, it may be too late. Remember our intensity axis and the emergency response. You may not have time. There has to be and there have to be processes where people know how to work together. If they learn and don't trust someone, you have to know it before and either eliminate that untrust through training, through work, or change the structure of your crisis management team. But you don't want the day-to-day politics of the organization influencing the way that the information is shared or managed while you're in the middle of a crisis. That is the worst things or one of the worst things that can happen to an organization as it is starting to manage its crisis. So when you start building and preparing your plans for the crisis or for future types of crisis, we talk about, first of all, understanding the threats. What are the threats to my organization? Yes, I may be hacked and it may happen in point A, B, C, or D. But what are the consequences of this event? What are the human consequences in human life? In many organizations, it can be human life. We have simulations, we have seen events where cyber events have started in critical infrastructure, water, electricity, transportation, attacking aircraft. All of these, what are the consequences of these threats? Financial. A financial threat can be not only pay me Bitcoin as a ransomware, but maybe I don't have access to funds. Or people are pulling their money from my bank and I have a run on the bank. Damage on funds can be through stock exchange. Maybe my stock will go down because of the damage or real or perceived through these cyber events. Understand the threats. Prioritize the risks that you have from these threats. What do I have to deal with first? How will I deal with it? According to the level of consequences, it has to be organization. And what is the possibility of it taking place? And when you start building your plan, think about the 3 phases. It's the most simple way. How will I react to the emergency itself, to each one of these risks? Who will be in charge? Who is supposed to talk to whom? What are the decisions that have to be made? What is the information that has to be provided? And then about business continuity. In many cases, the people managing the business continuity are not the same people managing the emergency. It is a different team. Do you have those teams in place? Do you have the processes in place? And then the 3rd phase is, how do I recover from this event? How do I learn to get better from this and from other events? How many of us read of what's happening around the world to other organizations and learn from that on our organization? And once I know my 3 phases and my 3 ways of response, and I have my 3 teams in place, then I have to train. And training can start through reading processes and testing. It can be sitting around the table and asking people what will they do in each event and opening it up as a discussion, a tabletop around the table. Hey, this has happened. Who would you talk to? what would you do? What are the delays? What are the challenges that I'm going to have to deal with? Talk about it. Think about all the possibilities that may happen so you are prepared for them. And from there, escalate it to war gaming. Now practice it in the real environment. You need to feel the pressure, to sweat it out. So when you face the real event, it won't be the first time. Learn from other people's experience. Open books, get information, talk to other organizations. How were they attacked? How did these things happen? How did they respond? And how well they were prepared for this. In short, preparing for crisis is a very complex process. And in 40 minutes, it's very, very difficult to discuss all the ways to prepare for it. But if you have in place the emergency, the continuity, and the recovery, and if you remember that the crisis just doesn't start in a second. In many cases, there are red flags. How do I identify them? What is a crisis? How would it look like? How will it feel? What are my protocols? How are they written? Where are they accessible? Are they understandable? And do we know what we have to do? If those are in place, then it means you will have a higher level and certainty of being able to deal with those types of crises as they take place. So what do you do in next? First of all, analyze your threats. We said, prioritize, simulate them, play around with them, analyze them, understand how different people within the organization react to these. Compare your expected processes and your real behaviors. Understand why they're happening, and then improve. If you take a procedure and think that that's the way people are going to behave, you are mistaken. If you don't practice, you will be surprised by the behavior of people. A few months ago, we participated in a simulation with an organization, a telecommunications company, that wanted to test their reaction to a cyber event. And they have a protocol. And in this protocol, any one of the C-suite management that would receive information that they are being extorted, that there is a ransomware attack on the organization, this information would flood up to the board of directors who would approve negotiating with the attacker and paying or not paying, depending on the type of attack and information, in order to get it back. And I'm not saying that's good, I'm not saying it's bad. This is the protocol organization. And they had lived with this protocol for 2 years. And everyone knew that the moment they get that information of the attack, this is what they'll do. They'll convene the board of directors, and this will be their emergency response and their business continuity response to this event. Minutes after this tabletop started and information started flowing, they practiced, and the attacker, the hacker, or the unethical hacker, approached the CEO of the company through his computer, of course, through email, and said, hey, you've been hacked, and I want 50 Bitcoin, and this is what I want, and this is what I want. Now, according to the protocols that had been written and never practiced, the CEO was supposed to then forward this information and convene the board of directors, and within a few hours decide what to do. But because he had never practiced it, and this was the first time he'd seen such an email, he thought it would be an intellectual effort to start talking to the attacker and try to understand from him and maybe get him to change his demands. And for the first 40 minutes of the simulation, the CEO was in a full discussion with the attacker. At that point, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer of the organization, heard that, understood that something is wrong within his systems, and he approached the CEO and he said, hey, I think we have a problem. And then the CEO said, yeah, I know we have a problem, I am now talking to the attacker for the last 40 minutes on our system. This is real time. The CISO looks at him and says, but we have a different protocol. We're not supposed to negotiate. And the CEO says, I'm not negotiating. But the truth is he had started a negotiation on this system. He had never known what it would feel like to see that ransomware email. He had never known what the adrenaline rush would be, understanding that he was in an event. He didn't understand how easy it is to be sucked into a negotiation with the attacker. And he just threw out all his protocols without even understanding the situation he was in. That is the reality. That will happen to many, many different organizations. A few weeks ago, we had another simulation. They had also, this was the first time they were practicing their protocol because the regulator told them that they had to. We're talking now about a bank. The chief information security understands that they've gone through a hacking event and there is a ransomware demand. And he knows that an X% of the information has been locked. And yet when he talks to the CEO of the organization, he doesn't understand the consequences of what this means, this information, when it's locked up. And he informs the CEO of the organization, the MD of the bank, that all their clients have been locked instead of only 5%. Therefore, the threat is perceived by the MD, the managing director, and the board of directors as much higher than it is in reality. And the response is totally different. When asked, he said, I didn't want to take any risks. I thought it was better that I say everything has been locked up instead of giving the number because I wasn't sure. The fact that we don't trust others with information that we have in real time may be crucial to the response if we do not understand the levels of priorities our C-suite have when managing an event. This can be crucial for mismanaging the event. These are a few examples of what it is in managing in a VUCA world. I know we have 40 minutes, so I'll stop here and open it up for any questions anyone may have.
Wow, thank you so much, Dotan. We do have two questions. I have them sent to me in the chat. One question is there any data that you could share, or have you seen any data, or in your work has this come up? Is there any correlation between better preparedness on the post-crisis expenditure? So I think the question is, after a crisis, it costs the money, the companies a lot. Do you have data that actually supports that better preparedness and simulations and practicing reduces the cost of a crisis on a company or an organization?
Look, IBM, not me, a slightly bigger organization than I am, has said that if you have an incident response plan and you practice it, you will lose $2 million less than if you carry it out, taking into the whole account of everything that you're carrying out in your expenditure. Now, $2 million may be a little, it may be a lot, depending on the organization, but that is the average for 2020. In my opinion, it's a lot of money, especially when you look at the number of organizations that have gone through this. Companies and organizations, it is better to prepare for this, to not be prepared. Look, let's face it, in a cyber event, unless you have stopped it before it started, the moment you have been compromised, there is damage. Now it's a question of mitigating the amount of damage that's going to take place. The faster you respond, the quicker you have your backups and whatever you have ready, the less it will cost you. So yes, there is a correlation here, and the numbers are around the $2 million framework.
Okay. The other question is, do you have any thoughts or insights on how small enterprises can prepare themselves for crisis management? I think the idea here is that small companies and enterprises just have less money. They have less infrastructure to have a team dedicated to making a plan. So what should small businesses, startups, and smaller companies do? How should they get prepared when they can't dedicate full resources for this?
I'm one of those people that say having a lot of resources doesn't mean you're better. In many cases, it creates a false environment of feeling that you're better prepared. So the first thing an organization should say is, hey, I'm small, but what are the consequences of an attack? That's number one. Number two is, how can I be attacked? Where are the vectors where I'm vulnerable? Now, am I protected in these? What systems do I have to stop it? And if I don't, and I know there's an area here where I have to take a risk because I don't have the funds to protect myself on every avenue, then if something happens, how will we react? Sit around the table and discuss it first. Understand that this is a reality that may happen to you, and not just say, hey, this may happen to us, and if it happens, God knows. Let's discuss it. If it happens, who will make the decisions? Who do we have to give information to? What information do we have to? You don't have to run to a Fortune 500 company, or you don't have to run to one of the big four, and I hope there are no big four companies here now that are angry with me because I have some clients among them, that will say, let's create $1 million report on how to prepare ourselves. You can sit down and create that 5-page document by yourself. If this happens, then do this, then do that. Let's talk. This is the information you need. What I would urge you to do, and this anyone can do, is sit in the evening and take case studies that are out there for free in many, many places. And I can send you later, Gilad, a few examples where you can get this information.
That would be great.
Then you can share it with people where you can learn from past events. Learn from past events and take your experience from them.
So I have one last question. This one is for me personally. Just listening to your talk now and think, we're in a cybersecurity conference and so much of our work is focused on code, code, this, code, that, code. But code somehow abstracts away the entire human experience. And it seems to me, listening to your talk, that doesn't matter what company you're in, doesn't matter what work you're doing. At the end of the day, it's humans who are making these decisions, and it's humans who are going to screw things up and humans who are going to do things right. So I guess I'm just reflecting that this is such an important topic that it seems like it's not, I don't know, it's not on the front of my education in cybersecurity training that you have to have crisis management and training. So is that also your experience, that you're finding yourself having to educate lots of people just on the importance of this work?
Yes. It's the same. We see a lot of the same things that we used to carry out in preparing for terrorist events. The same tabletops, the same wargaming that are now being carried out on the cyber front. Because now we're starting to understand that cyber doesn't only mean the zeros and the ones. It's the humans that at the end will have to make decisions. Yes, you may have systems that will stop or open and help you manage an event. But at the end, someone will make a decision. And the question is, what information will you have? And do they know what it means to make a decision when you feel that sweat trickling down your back because someone's in your system and all your clients are compromised?
Yeah. Gary. Okay, I think, let me just check the time. I think, we're perfect on time actually, and we have no further questions. So with that, I would like to thank you very much, Dotan, for this very engaging and enlightening presentation. As we just discussed, it's too often forgotten that at the end of the day, it's a human element behind all crisis events, including cyber. And I would like to extend my sincere thanks on behalf of all the participants and the Amrita family for joining us today and for sharing with us your wonderful thoughts and your detailed presentation, and helping us think about, how can we plan for our own crises, what might we be under crises, and get ready to maybe have those tough conversations and set aside that time. So thank you very, very, very much. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, thank you. So I think our next...
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, you're so welcome. Thanks is all from us.